Listen, I told you guys that there's a new book out, Michael Spinks. It's, I believe, the only book written on Michael Spinks. And joining us right now is the author of this book, my man, Jack Hirsch. Joins us. What's up, Jack?
Hey, Billy. Thanks for having me on. I've been listening to you backstage. Good stuff. The Ali Jimmy Young fight, I believe, was in the evening from Landover, Maryland. It was a night fight. That wasn't an afternoon Wide World of Sports fight. Ali did fight on Wide World of Sports a good number of times, but the fight against Young was in the evening. It was a weeknight, as I recall.
Yeah, I wonder if you think they rebroadcast, because they used to do that on ABC.
Yeah, that's very possible that they rebroadcast that. It appeared on Wide World of Sports because it was a controversial decision, as you said. A lot of people, including yourself, thought Young won the fight.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, let's talk about your book. I have it right here. I'm going to show it. Michael's Jinx Spinks, and I do believe, am I right? It's the only book ever written on Michael so far, right?
Only book. There was a book that came out on both Spinks brothers about in the year 2011 or thereabouts. But any book that would come out on both Leon and Michael Spinks would focus a little more on Leon because of his personality and his charisma. This is the only book ever written on Michael Spinks, and it's an authorized biography, meaning Michael Spinks worked with me on the book. So it wasn't just a question of me writing a book on Michael Spinks. I did the writing, but we worked on it together, spent many hours together.
All right, listen. So we got a live chat room going on here, and I have my one of my regulars in here. He always likes to crash and come up with his own questions. So before I even ask you one of mine, I am going to put his in there. Let me see if I can get it to come up on it. Okay, he's saying, ask Jack in the boxing news series on the Golden Gloves decline were issues like election disputes, infighting, blah, blah, blah.
Wow. That's great that someone remembers that. I wrote a 4-part series, the demise really of the New York Golden Gloves and the infighting that was going on with, the Golden Gloves, the Metros and everything. But everyone had a different version of what went on, basically. But the bottom line is the Golden Gloves was a magic name. And we don't have the Golden Gloves anymore, that name. It's called the Metros. They're starting a new history on their own. And I've been out of the loop since I put in amateur boxing these last few years, what's been transpiring and so on. So it's kind of hard for me to answer. But it was an investigative piece I did. I was proud of it. But the bottom line is they never got it together, the New York Daily News and the Metros. But listen, amateur boxing's thriving. The Metros are doing a good job by all accounts.
Jack, look, so I wanted to ask you some stuff about the book. It was a great read. And when I was reading the part, of course, about the Mike Tyson fight, I always thought that Spinks lost the fight before he even set foot in the ring. I'll never forget the look on his face coming down, walk during the ring walk. There were two looks on fighters' faces I'll never forget. The look of fear on Michael Spinks' face walking down down that aisle, and then not related to this, but Evander Holyfield's look of confidence when he was walking down the aisle when he fought and beat Mike Tyson. But I was shocked that he admitted that. You wrote in the book that he admitted that he was scared. He regrets feeling that way. Tell us about that.
But he says he didn't lose the fight because he froze, because he was scared. He admitted at one point he was up at night and he was worried what Tyson might actually do to him, but he put it out of his mind. And Wally Matthews, who was covering the fight, a New York reporter, was by ringside, and he heard Spinks say right before he entered the ring, Wally told me, that Spinks says, well, I'm going to do the best I can. But that was always Michael's attitude. He didn't feel he was going to beat Larry Holmes when they fought the first time. He thought he could win, but he didn't necessarily feel he would win. His attitude was always, I'm going to do the best I can and let the chips fall where they may. What hurt Michael most in that fight is he was a notoriously slow starter, and Tyson was a very quick, explosive starter. And Michael had to be ready to sprint from the opening bell, basically. He didn't have time to warm up, but he was fighting in the fashion he did all his fights. I mean, and if you look at Michael's light heavyweight title defenses, he would usually lose, early rounds, even against a fighter like David Sears. Sears outboxed him the first 2 rounds before Michael landed a big punch and stopped Sears in the 3rd round. And against Tyson, that had devastating consequences. He just never got going. Tyson caught him. And Michael said, look, he had some fear of Tyson. He admitted it. But he said it wasn't a type of fear that prohibited him from performing at his best.
Well, I was shocked to read further that he was kind of pissed off that he never got a chance at a rematch. Tell us about that.
No, he wasn't pissed off about it, Billy. He understood. Immediately afterwards, he would have liked a rematch, but Michael also took a vow during his years as light heavyweight champion. He was going to keep fighting until he got beat. That's very unusual. Most fighters talk about retiring unbeaten who haven't lost a fight. Michael's attitude was, as soon as I lose, I've had it. But then when he lost to Tyson, he talked about an immediate rematch, but he was sensible. He knew he wasn't going to get it. It was such a tough fight to put together, him and Mike Tyson, to begin with. And especially when he lost in the fashion he did, there was going to be no demand for a rematch. This wasn't like Floyd Patterson and Sonny Liston, where Patterson got knocked out in 1 round, because Patterson was the sole champion in the public's view. So when Liston knocked him out, Liston nearly had an obligation to give Patterson a rematch. Tyson had no obligation to do that with Spinks, and it wasn't a marketable fight afterwards. Even now, Spinks says now, if I fought him in a rematch, I don't think I would have beat him. So if Spinks feels that way now, imagine how everyone else would have felt if a rematch was made.
Well, you stumbled on one of my points. One thing I've always admired about fighters is when they say they retire and stay retired. And Michael did that. And hearing you say that, it was kind of in the back of his mind that when he lost, he was going to hang him up. But it also seemed that it took a long time for Michael Spinks to, I don't know if I could say, to accept the retirement. He was never really outgoing with his fan base or anything. I noticed in the last few years he's a lot better. He's more, he's more obtainable and approachable, because he never was. I've crossed paths with him several times in the past, and he was very hard to talk to. What's changed?
Well, he's hard to talk to now. For the book, I would really have to push him to talk to me, because he's not a man of many words. And if he was a man of many words, I would have had him on here today with us, Billy. But Michael, he's just very agreeable. He doesn't have much to say. I've never seen a fighter with less of an ego than him. You could tell him, I think Saad Muhammad would have knocked you out. Bob Foster would have knocked you out. This guy would have beaten you. And he'd just say, you're entitled to your opinion, and it wouldn't bother him. It wouldn't bother him. What he missed most about boxing after losing to Tyson is boxing was a job. Actually, it was the only full-time job he ever had as an adult. I mean, he was in maintenance a little while coming back from the Olympics. He delivered newspapers as a teenager for a little while, but he missed his job. He missed his routine. Michael didn't like the time off. He liked the idea of getting up in the morning, doing road work, then going to the gym in the afternoon. And he didn't have his routine anymore, and he didn't know what to do with his time. And what Michael then started to do, and he's done it for a good amount of years, he's a little bit of a recluse. He goes in his room, he closes the door, and he watches television a good part of the day. I mean, that's Michael. That's why in recent years, when he gets to go out to these banquets, he's happy because that's about, one of the few times he actually gets out. He gets to meet people, and he enjoys meeting his old opponents. He enjoys meeting fans. If anyone stops him, he's happy to oblige him. He's a nice person, a nice guy.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good to hear. His two fights, I look, a lot of people forget how great he was in the light heavyweight division, and he certainly was really one of the all-time greats. But myself, I've always liked and admired his two fights with Larry Holmes. And I know some people think, one of the fights was controversial. I don't. I think he clearly won both fights, and the way he won them was very similar. He would just get in and get out. He would land those punches, and Larry couldn't do anything, in my opinion. I mean, yes, he chased him around, but Michael Spinks fought a smart fight. It almost looked – I remember him throwing the punches, and I was saying to myself, it almost looks like it's hurting Michael Spinks to throw these punches. He had that look on his face. Tell us about those fights, because I know they're instrumental in the history of Michael Spinks.
No, I talked to Larry for the book as well, and Larry seemed to let go. He didn't tell me anything that I thought was so revealing. His thing was, well, it's not Michael's fault. The judges scored it the way it did. Michael's a nice guy. I got nothing against Michael. It's not his fault what the judges did, like one of those. Uh-huh. And for a lot of years, Michael was very leery of Larry Holmes. He didn't want to go near him. In fact, it's in the book. When Larry Holmes, I think the year was 2016, invited Michael to his golf tournament in Eastern Pennsylvania, Michael said he'd go, and then the day before he got cold feet. He was worrying what Larry might do to him. That's how deep it was personally. He was a little scared. And then when Michael didn't show, Larry called up, what's with Michael? I invited him as a guest. They're good today because Larry has let go. I wouldn't call them best friends. Like I said, you can invite them to dinner. They'll break bread together. They'll sit at the same table. But maybe it's better that one person sits between them, even though they get along fine. Michael still feels Larry has a little edgy about those decisions. But you mentioned that you thought Michael won both fights. Most people feel Michael edged the first fight, but there are people who do feel Larry won. Then there's the second fight, which some people feel Michael won, but more people than not, including this writer, feel Larry, was a couple of points ahead at the end. But this is something that you should remember in sports in general. You need to close an opponent out. And when Larry jumped off to a big early lead in the second fight, he allowed Michael to get back into the fight and get within range to get the decision. And it got so the term robbery is so overused. I mean, once in a while we see a robbery, like Roy Jones not getting the decision in the Olympics. That's a blatant robbery. Alfredo Escalera being given the decision over Tyrone Everett, that was a blatant robbery. I mean, Jorge Ahumada being given a draw against Bob Foster, that was a robbery. We shouldn't say decisions like that are subjective. But there's certain close fights. We shouldn't call them robberies. We shouldn't say Holmes was robbed in the second fight because there are people who share your opinion, Bill. Like I talked to for the book, Bone Crusher Smith. He thinks Michael won both fights. And why would he say that? He lost twice to Larry Holmes, Bone Crusher. So if anything, he'd want Larry to look good. And other people have that opinion as well. A lot of them that Michael deserved the decision in the second fight. It's kind of split down the middle in a sense.
Well, I agree with you 100% about the term robbery being overused. I mean, it makes me sick. One of the best things that I think I ever saw, and they never did it again, was when ESPN put cameras on the heads of the three judges, and they were able to show you a punch, okay, and what each, from the viewpoint that each judge had of the same punch. And, that makes a huge difference on the scorecards, because you and I could be watching the same fight and we see a punch and you could say, oh, hey, Bill, that was a great punch. And I'd say, what do you mean? It grazed him. He moved out of the way. That's what I saw. That's where the word subjective comes in. And I think sometimes with the view of the specific judges will indicate what their scorecard is. And sometimes it's not cut and dry. And when it's close, you hit it on the head. You got to close out the show. You don't necessarily have to knock a guy out, but you got to win every round. You can't assume, and I agree 100%.
Bill, you make a great point. It's the angle that you're on. I remember going to a club show once out on Long Island, and I was hanging out with one of the judges who wasn't judging that fight. He was waiting for the next fight. And we all thought one fighter clearly won the fight. But all three judges gave it to the other one, and we determined the angle we were on. All we saw, they were locked in close, the two fighters. All we saw was the back of one fighter. So the angle has, such a big bearing on it. And it makes you think, the referee had his vote taken away, but actually the referees had the best angle of judging a fight, of anyone, but with all their other responsibilities. I'm not advocating for them to be judges again, but you're 100% correct. It's the angle that you're on.
Yeah. No, it definitely makes a difference. And sometimes fighters just have a tendency to feel comfortable at a certain place in the ring. They always navigate over to the one spot they seem to like, and if the judge that doesn't see well, hey, where does that one judge have it? Well, maybe it's because of the way he sees it.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's the story? What's the inside scoop about the Butch Lewis, the disappointment in Butch Lewis?
Man, oh man, Butch Lewis did a lot of great things for Michael. Okay, we got to give Butch Lewis his due, but not such a good thing at the very end, the way it turned out. But when we were doing this book, at one point, Michael looked very, very sad when I was talking with him about Butch, because when we agreed to do the book, I told Michael I was going to ask him a lot of questions that were going to make him feel very uncomfortable. And it wasn't going to be a fan book. And I was going to respect his boundaries on certain things, that I'm not going to talk to a couple of people he might not want me to talk to, and a couple of things I can leave out. But all in all, I had to have editorial control. And when it came to Butch Lewis and what happened with his money, I'm not going to avoid that. I let him know that, And Michael, I also told him, you have a few warts, and it's going to have to come out. It can't be a completely self-serving fan book. And he, to his credit, he agreed to that. The good Butch Lewis did for him was, even in the words of Russell Peltz and Don Majeski, the best job of moving a fighter they've ever seen, getting him the right fights at, practically every stage and building his career up. And fantastic job. The bad part about this was this: Michael trusted Butch unconditionally, to the point where he let Butch hold on to his money, all his money. And Butch would be paying him a lifetime allowance. Butch paid all his bills. And Butch, he cared about Michael in everyone's view. It's not like he didn't. There were some, like Don Majeski, who said, of course he would care about Michael, because Michael was his golden goose. Butch could be very rude to everybody, secretaries in the office, anyone. But with Michael, he was always polite. But when Michael was light heavyweight champion, Butch would give him $1,000 a week, spending money, and pay his expenses. When Michael became heavyweight champion, he increased it to $10,000 a month, and he continued to pay Michael's expenses. Now, when Michael's last fight was in 1988, as you know, against Mike Tyson, Butch lived till the year 2011. Butch continued to pay all of Michael's expenses and everything the same way. But in 2011, Butch had died. He died. All of a sudden, Michael became destitute. He saw taxes weren't paid for a few years. His utilities were cut off, car payments, this, that. And Michael didn't have a penny to his name. I mean, he had to borrow some money, to get an attorney, and he had to sue Butch Lewis's estate as much as he hated to do it. And what's amazing about this is that Michael, had to have a clue Butch was in declining health. What would be of his money? But Michael was so carefree, he never did. But Butch had done a couple of really good things for Michael when Michael was a world champion. He set up a retirement account that drew interest, and it was somewhere in the vicinity between 55 and 85,000. And Michael forgot all about the retirement account, and all of a sudden it clicked. Wow, Butch had some retirement account for me. Let me look into it. And the people at the bank had been trying to contact Michael, but they could never get through because Michael never answered in Delaware. Butch also saw to it that Michael buy his home in Delaware, a block away from where Joe Biden lived, and pay it all off. So Michael has this big chip in Delaware now, a home that I estimate would be a couple of $1 million or so if you elected to sell it. But Michael is living now with his wife, Flo Anthony, in New York. They got married as the book went to press, but they've been together since the 1980s, and she's kind of been his agent and all. But to sum up, Michael had sued Butch Lewis's estate. He got back an extra $600,000 on top of it. Michael is comfortable with all his finances. He doesn't have nearly the wealth that he should have, not nearly, but Michael is in a nice situation. He's no worse than upper middle class. And as long as he lives off the interest of what he has, he'll be fine. He'll be fine as long as he lives off the interest and doesn't, spend extravagantly going forward.
That's good to know. I got one more question for you. I'll
keep my answer shorter. If you have more questions, I could be a little long-winded. I should observe the bell.
No. Hey, no. What are you talking about? This is great. No, I love it, and I'll be sending you some links and stuff. But listen, you had the opportunity of really, digging deep into Michael Spinks's head. What was in your opinion, or maybe for a fact, what do you think Michael's proudest moment or proudest victory was in boxing? I mean, he achieved so much, but what do you think was the best thing he's ever done in his mind?
It depends the day you talk to Michael, because he varies between the Olympics, winning the light heavyweight title, then winning the heavyweight title. He keeps going back and forth. It depends the day you catch him on. The Holmes fight, winning the heavyweight title, I think Michael regards that as his greatest accomplishment. But I think it was the Olympics because he got to share that moment directly with Leon. Now, when he beat Holmes, it was partly personal with Michael. He had nothing against Larry Holmes personally, but Holmes had stopped his brother Leon, who Michael was very close with. And so he got a certain amount of satisfaction. It wasn't just winning the heavyweight title. It was kind of getting one back for his brother, who he was, very, like I said, very close with. Both of them kept late hours. It would be very common for Michael and Leon to be in a phone conversation at 2:30 in the middle of the night, laughing and joking with one another. Michael said Butch called him Dracula because he'd come out at night. He'd keep these crazy hours. He still does. He's a late sleeper in the morning, but he's up late at night. I think if Michael, you pinned him down exactly what was his greatest thrill, he would say it was the Olympics. I'll tell you what his greatest regret is. I'll tell you that, Billy, not having the chance to fight Matthew Saad Muhammad. Now, even though Michael beat Dwight Muhammad Qawi to unify the light heavyweight title, it wasn't the same because Michael and Qawi used to spar a lot in Joe Frazier's gym. They sparred so many rounds, both of them knew one another well. So this unification match was kind of a continuation of what they did in the past. Plus, Michael and Qawi, even though they didn't want to admit it, they were kind of fond of one another. They had an okay relationship. But Saad Muhammad got on Michael's nerves to the point where one day Michael told me a story. He showed up at Joe Frazier's gym where Michael was based in Philadelphia from 1978 to 1985, and they sparred. He wanted to make Michael look bad, like you're not a real champ. And according to Michael, this is only Michael's version, Michael did a job on him, bloodied his nose, and so on. But I'll tell you, Michael doesn't have the biggest ego because my favorite story of the book, and you're going to love this, Billy, was in Joe Frazier's gym. Joe Frazier and Butch Lewis were like brothers. They were so close. Michael and Joe Frazier liked one another. But one day, Michael, when he's light heavyweight champ, goes up to Joe's office and he's teasing him. He's joking with him. And Joe had had enough. Joe was retired. Next thing Michael knows, in the ring with the gloves on, and Michael's a world champion at this point. He feels I can handle Joe easy. He's not in shape. Is he kidding? Well, the bell rings, and Michael is shocked because Joe comes out smoking. He's throwing these left hooks. And Michael says, I'm running all over the ring. If he was in shape, he could have torn my head off. I'm just trying to survive. And he said, and even he loves this story even today, Michael. He says, good thing for me, Joe wasn't in shape. I hate to think what would have happened to me if he was.
That's great. That's great. It really sounds like you got a good opportunity to talk deep with Michael Spinks, and it's something that I know not many people have gotten. But great book. Where can people get this book?
Yeah. The people can get the book, Michael Jinx Spinks. Best way to go about it on the Amazon website, the Barnes & Noble website, the Target website, the Walmart website, the various websites to order it that way.
Well, it's good. Jack, I appreciate you coming on. And, I'm going to be doing this roundtable in the near future. And I think, I've been trying to figure out, I wanted to have 4 other people and stuff. I think you would fit in. So maybe.
I've been around a while. I've got credentials, Billy. I was 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association of America. I've been around. I sat in the last row of the first Ali Frazier fight. That's how far back I go.
Well,
last row.
You earned a spot on our roundtable. We're going to be talking. You
can slip me, and I'll come in on late notice if I'm available. If someone cancels out, I don't stand on principle when it comes to talking about boxing.
It's going to be something around this time. It will all be on. It's going to be good. I'll be in touch
with
you on that.
Great.
I'll
it
also
would be a pleasure.
I'll get you some links, and we'll go from there. I really appreciate you coming on, Jack.
Great, Billy, and I appreciate you having me. Okay, all the best. Take care.
All right, my man. I'll talk to you soon. That's Jack Hirsch, and like you said, you can get his book, Michael Jinx Spinks, right here. It's a good read. You got to get yourself a copy. Amazon is the place, and like he said, Walmart and Target, or any place you want to get a good book, get this book, Jack Hirsch's Michael Jinx Spinks.